This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with former Great Britain doubles #1 tennis player, Sarah Borwell. She discusses her development as a junior and the effect her coach had on her long-term development, her journey as a pro and participating in tournaments such as Wimbledon and the Commonwealth Games, and her current project in supporting players with their transition out to the States. Please be part of the growth of this podcast by sharing, subscribing and leaving a review. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Sarah, really appreciate you jumping on. I know we've had a little bit of a catch up there, but sounds like all's good, all safe and well with you guys.
Yeah, everything's good over here. Just trying to kind of battle through with working and having 2 kids now. I didn't realize, I wish someone had told me when I was in my 20s how busy I would be once I actually have children. So
I bet you thought that the tennis was hard compared, and then you've got to run around after them. You're like, actually, the tennis is probably a bit easier.
yeah, no, we were like trying to just go out and celebrate a win the other day and go out for a drink, and we couldn't find a babysitter. So I miss the days when at 28 we just like, oh, do you want to go and just go out and get some dinner or something? So yeah, it's you've got to be very good with your time management skills now, that's for sure.
Sure, but I think from my perspective, it's a really good opportunity just to kind of go into a little bit of the world of tennis, which I've done once with Barry Scotto from the University of Bath, and he's probably discussed it from a management point of view and what they do in that program. But you've probably got a very different perspective, both having been through the UK system and then now obviously living out in the States and seeing what they do out there. So for people that might not have come across you, do you just want to explain a little bit of an overview of, I guess, how you got into the sport, where the sport took you, and then where you are currently?
Yeah, I guess I'm like my 5-year-old is now, where I just have bags of energy. And so my mum and dad had to get me into loads of different sports. So my favorite sport is actually football, but at the time when I was growing up, that there was more going on in other sports than they are now for the girls. And we got really lucky that 5 minutes down from our house, a brand new tennis centre opened up called Tennis World. And I'm from Middlesbrough originally. And I think we just got very, very lucky where we had all of the young, passionate, hardworking tennis coaches at that time, kind of all in one place. Loads of young kids my age, boys and girls. But it was a really kind of family-oriented club. So the social side of it was brilliant, like loads going on. So my dad would used to just kind of drop me down at 9 a.m. on a Saturday and pick me up at 6 p.m. And I've just been running around all day, probably played about an hour, 2 hours of tennis, but then played football, hide and seek, water fights. So my childhood was kind of quite normal considering what I ended up doing with my tennis. But I started at like 5 years old, but did all sports, field hockey, football, threw the javelin, did everything, but tennis was always my kind of number one. And then like played a lot of junior tennis, traveled the country, but I was in a full-time school. So I was at a comprehensive school, Nunthorpe Comprehensive, which at the time had like Jonathan Woodgate, who everyone will know as one of the top Newcastle players, went to Real Madrid. Liam Plunkett, who played cricket for England. Chris Tomlinson, who was at the Olympics, triple jumper. So came from a really cool area. And my tennis kind of started to take off when I was 17 and started to do very well with it, but I wasn't talent ID'd, I wasn't funded, I was kind of left to my own devices. So I stumbled across the American University pathway route, basically.
So where did that take you on that front when you started going out into the US college system, etc.?
It allowed me kind of, I was quite shy growing up, and it was nice when I found my kind of group of tennis friends where I felt like I fitted in. School, I never felt that I really kind of fitted, but tennis was when I really kind of started finding confidence. But I never believed in my game. I had all these people telling me, oh, you could be very good, but I didn't believe them. I wasn't seeing results really. Went off to American university and kind of fell into, Americans are very confident and very positive, and with all the kind of on-site capabilities of playing every day, 2 to 2.5 hours in the sunshine, competing every weekend, having a really good support system around me, my tennis really started to take off, and I started seeing the results that my coach Nigel Garton had been telling me from 15 years old, that I would start growing into my game. He always said, look, you're going to peak when you're 21. That's when you're going to start playing your best tennis. But when you tell a 15-year-old that, you think 21's ancient, like that's a long time to wait. But he was kind of right. Like I had a big serve, big forehand, never went in when I was a junior, really started to work well when I was in America. So just kind of ended up moving up the rankings until I finished. I was top 10 in college tennis. And that's when I was asked if I wanted to go pro, and someone would find a sponsor for me. And this is kind of where my life starts. It's funny when you look back to see all the pathways and different ways your life has changed. And I ended up then living in Las Vegas for 1.5 years when I first went pro, which I would never have kind of dreamed of that when I was young. And then moved back down to London, and I was living in Cheltenham for a bit with Pete Russell, another very good coach. And that's when I was on the tour for 10 years, basically. So all of these dreams that I didn't really have as a junior, because I never figured that I would ever be a professional tennis player. I ended up representing my country, Fed Cup. I won a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games, played every Grand Slam. And that's just being a kind of a normal teenager from Middlesbrough who had too much energy, basically, and was put into every type of sport.
I think something you said that was really interesting there was around, you had a really big serve and a really big forehand. At what point did you begin to recognise that that was actually a super strength for you? And was it you that recognised it, or was it coaches?
I don't think I've never really recognised, like even looking back with thinking how well I did, like getting to 65 in the world, it's because it's just your life. You're kind of not really ever aware of it. My serve helped me out of a lot of trouble a lot of the time. I wasn't the best mover. And so I wasn't that quick around the court. So having big weapons are really important, basically. And I had 2 of them. And then I factored in, I could volley, I could slice, I had good hands. And then the big thing, and that's what I tell a lot of my players who I help place into universities, is I just had a very good work ethic. Like I just kept going and going, and I was determined, and I just competed hard and kind of kept working on things. I enjoyed learning and kind of trying to master a new skill, and trying to kind of educate the players now that, look, even when I was 26, that's when I became a doubles specialist. I was learning all these new things. And because you think once you get there, that's it. But you look at Nadal, like his winning the Australian Open, you could tell that his game, he'd been working on moving forward, being able to volley. So it's just all these different things that you start adding into your game. But having a large serve and a big forehand is certainly something that you need when you move as slow as I used to. So
is that something you consciously developed, or was that just something that naturally, as you just grew up, you're like, oh, I can actually do this. This is something I'm pretty good at compared to everyone else?
I think it's just something that I'm quite tall. I'm 5'10", got long levers, and I just had a very good, Nigel was such a good coach, and he, at the time, Tennis World, we have so many players representing Great Britain, and all of us had very good technical foundations. And I remember kind of trying to learn the second serve, where you'd spend a lot of time kind of kneeling down, so you couldn't use your legs, and you just were understanding how to do pronation and the technique. But I don't remember, I guess as a junior, it was always a big serve, but it was just more that it was mechanically, it was very sound and would flow. And my forehand was always quite nice as well, but I have no backhand, but I had a good forehand that I could use.
How you mentioned there a little bit around the teaching of the second serve. How did you at that time kind of develop skills? Was it very drill based in terms of, like you've mentioned there, hitting 100, 200, 300 balls in a very precise way? Or was there open-ended games where you were getting more points for certain actions? What did that look like?
Yeah, we had it because it was so many players at that time, and we linked in with the Teesside University, so there was a lot of older players and loads of adults. I probably had about 2 hours a week of individuals with Nigel, where we'd be very specific basket feeds, but then it was all squad sessions after that. So you'd have an hour and a half with squads, maybe before school. Probably didn't play as I know now. There's a lot more squads where it's more points based and you just play. We kind of did that on a Friday night, where you'd literally just play sets with people. But a lot of the time it was more drill based in the squads, where you'd just the bog standard drilling, basically cross-court forehands, change direction down the line, a lot of stuff like that. So it was a nice mixture. But yeah, I know nowadays a lot of kids like to go more to individuals and not really be part of a big group and have it be fun, which for me, it wouldn't have worked too well. I found tennis quite anxiety ridden as a kid. Juniors I found very stressful. So if it wasn't for that social group that I had, where it was more fun in the squad sessions, then I probably wouldn't have made it, to be honest. So for me, being surrounded by so many people really helped.
Why did you find it anxiety ridden?
I don't know. My parents didn't put any pressure on me at all. They were kind of the perfect parents of just being supportive. And if I lost, I lost. But I just put the pressure on myself, really. And I used to count the days down to a tournament and kind of worry for the, 10 days building up to the tournament. I'd get more and more anxious until the day of the event. I'd be in the car and my friends would just laugh because I just wouldn't speak. I'd be so nervous. And there would be times when I'd go on and play at nationals where I played the first round of nationals one year, and I was so tight and scared that my first serve literally flew over the net and hit the girl in the chest. It didn't bounce. It was just like so flat and hard. And it wasn't until I was kind of 17 and knew I was going off to America where I started not caring as much. But those initial years, it was very difficult.
This might be a loaded question here. At the time in your region, were you known as the best tennis player in that area for your age group?
No, and that's what was kind of nice for me. I wasn't at Tennis World we had so many good players like Joanna Cunliffe, Lindsay Davison, Libby Fletcher, Lydia Perkins. They were all LTA players at the time. It was called Rover. That was the sponsorship. So all of them would have their special Rover sweaters, and you'd know who the Rover kids were. And I was never one of them. I was never talent ID'd. So I never got any funding, which was great for me because my friends who had that kind of Rover title and everyone knew who they were and they were funded, they were the people who like everyone wanted to beat. And I was kind of left to my own devices. So I think that helped me a lot, kind of just being left and ignored a little bit. So then and also I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder and liked to prove people wrong, so that helped kind of spur me on to want to get better. So I was one of the best in my county and in the region, but not nationally. I wasn't that highly ranked.
I was just wondering, because you mentioned there around the anxiety stuff, I can imagine if if your persona was around being a very good tennis player and everyone, the target on your back, that kind of goes hand in hand. But it's interesting that maybe you found the challenges away from that, in terms of there were people ahead of you, you had a chip on your shoulder, but you still found it challenging from I guess, a level of performance perspective of putting pressure on yourself to make sure you perform.
Yeah, it's weird looking back. But I guess I have players now who it's the same thing. You're nervous and it's worrying, and they'll have parents who are like mine, who are just really supportive and like kind of weren't abusive if you lost a match. They were kind of like, well, it's just a match. So the tennis side of things I didn't particularly enjoy until I was 17. What kept me going was the social side of it and the friends that I had. And in the summer, there was we'd play a lot of tournaments, but I might lose first round and still be there for the full week, hanging out with people and having fun. And that's kind of what kept me going, really.
What was it at 17? I know you mentioned a little bit about knowing you were going to go away and stuff, but was there anything else around that time that kind of switched for you to make you go, actually, the pressure doesn't need to be on as much as it is, and you began to have, I think, more success, you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think it probably was more my game just started working. So for years, Nigel had just said, keep hitting it. You have to be aggressive. All of these people who are kind of pushers and are making a lot of balls, you're going to overtake them at some point, but you've just got to keep going after your shots, and you're going to miss, but they're going to start getting closer and closer to the line as you get older. So I just kind of kept going for it. And I guess at 17, the balls which I was missing by a few inches started to drop in. And then that's when the results came. And I think by that point as well, I kind of knew that, okay, I can get a full scholarship at an American university, which that takes, even though my parents, they never said, oh, I'm spending so much money on your tennis and you're losing. Like, that was never anything that was said to me. But I'm sure subconsciously, as a young person, knowing that I could go to America and that was it for my parents having to fund my tennis. And then that was probably something that got removed stress-wise.
And was there any particular reason as to why those shots began dropping in? Was there anything you did different, or any particular training or anything?
No, I probably just hit more and more. Like, I trained every day. I probably did an hour and a half every day, which wasn't a lot compared to the ones who were kind of full-time. But I just think if you just keep practicing, Nigel, I'm sure, tweaked a few things technically to make sure that I was becoming a bit more consistent, a bit more controlled aggression with my shots. But I think it's just you just hit tons of balls and it starts to click. And then when you start to see the results of it, then you just gain confidence, really. So if I'd been consistently just hitting it into the fence and not really understanding what I was doing, but I like to learn and I would enjoy learning. And I'm old now, so remembering what I was thinking back then as a 15-year-old, I'm not sure, but I would imagine I'm similar to how I am now, with kind of being a student of the game and wanting to learn and being able to like listen to my coach and do what they say, basically.
So going on to that coaching perspective, how important is it having someone there that, I guess, one, you trust, but two, that kind of identifies, well, no, if you're going to have this as your super strength, if your ability to hit a ball hard is going to be what could be a USP and make you a pro, you got to keep doing it. You can't go to pushing it around the court, or one of my friends that we spoke about earlier, moonballing. He used to come back from a tournament and be like, people are moonballing me, it's doing my head in. Yeah. How important is it to have a coach that actually really just allows you to feel comfortable to keep doing it even if you get it wrong? Yeah, no, he was amazing, and that's why we had so many good players come through, and we still do now, just because I'd had a lot of outside kind of from the federation and everything saying, look, we can't fund you, you're not winning enough, you need to make more balls.
And so I guess if I'd had a coach who wasn't willing to kind of stand up, then I might have just changed my game style. But he was just like, nope, keep doing what you're doing. Plus we grew up on artificial grass, so it doesn't really lend itself to like slowing it down and being a pusher, because it just flies. So maybe that also helped me, just with kind of being able to slice, being able to have a big serve, big forehand, I can volley. But yeah, like Nigel's one of the main reasons why I was successful, and why so many of us who've come through that club are still in the tennis world, like trying to help people. Like Joanna Cudliffe works for the LTA, and we've got players, Libby Fletcher still coaches at Tennis World, doing amazing things with the juniors there. So he's kind of, it was such a fun place to be part of, that we all kind of see it as a second home, and we still go back and enjoy going there.
So looking at making that jump then, what was that like for a 17-year-old you or 18-year-old you? Obviously, you mentioned earlier, you're quite shy and you're going completely across new part of the world, no friends with you, new environment. So I guess, how did you see it from a personal perspective, and how did you adapt to life there? But then in terms of like a facility and support area, was there anything in particular that you thought, actually, this, in reflection, this really helped me push on in my tennis?
Yeah, because I think as a junior, I never had goals of going pro, because I never thought I was any good. So that never, like a lot of players I help are just like, that's my end goal, I want to go pro, but I never had that goal. And so it was always stage by stage for me. So we managed to get myself over to America. We placed ourselves. My mum basically did everything, bless her. Like, it was before the internet, so she was doing a lot of calls on the landline, talking to college coaches. Like, I think back, like I was too nervous to speak to the coaches on the phone, which is ridiculous, because all of my players now, like, they're on Zoom with them. There must be like, so it's quite stressful, and I couldn't even speak to them on the phone about when I was being recruited. I ended up going to Rice University, which academically is very, very strong, like an Oxford, Cambridge, Durham type university, where if I'd applied as a student, they would have deleted my application immediately, because I work hard, but I was a BC GCSE student, but I got in because of my tennis. And when you go over to America, you immediately walk into a team, so you have friends straight away. So I think, as much as it was very scary going across the pond and being away a long way from your family, you actually have such a big support system around you, which you might not actually get at a British university, that you're picked up by the coach in the airport, you've got 7 immediate friends on the team who you hang out with, you've got academic advisors, you've got other athletes who you tend to congregate with. So the transition wasn't that hard. And plus, you're going into a week which is called, you have orientation week. So at Rice, that was kind of the best week of my life. Like, it was so much fun. And I remember thinking, gosh, if the 4 years are like this is going to be incredible. But then the academics and the classes started, and I soon realized that I was not intelligent enough to keep up with anyone at the university. Like, it was pretty crazy. So I was like working till 2 a.m. every morning, just trying to stay on track with my work. And I didn't particularly, the tennis setup there for me wasn't great. The coach initially, he's retired now, but the coach initially thought that I would maybe play doubles and I wouldn't play singles, but I ended up playing number 1 doubles and was number 2 singles, 1 and 2 singles. And so I did well my freshman year, considering I was struggling academically, and I ended up transferring across to where my best friend Joanna Cudliffe was. She was at the University of Houston. And then so that was a little bit more manageable academically, and my tennis then really started to take off, because I wasn't up till 2 a.m. worrying about philosophy and reading Immanuel Kant about 25 times.
I imagine going to one of the Rice's Ivy League, right?
They're like Ivy League of the South. That's what they kind of class them. But I remember one of the first kind of we were talking to one of the academic people, and they were just like, we pride ourselves on having the biggest workload in America. And I was just like, oh. So my friends all, like, I had my first semester, I had philosophy, English, history, and then psychology, big like reading classes. And I had to read like a book a week for English. And my friends are like, yeah, you just scan it and then write a report. And I was just like, I can't scan anything and then take it in. But because they're so intelligent, they were just like, yeah, just scan it, do this. And so I realized I was out of my depth with that one.
I don't envy you in the slightest there. That would be for me. So in terms of support, when you also got to Houston and whatnot, and looking around the tennis side, what things did they have in place to help you continue to progress? And obviously, I think you mentioned Nigel said you'll play your best tennis around 21 years of age, which you said kind of came true. Was there any particular reason that they helped you to achieve that?
I think it was just matches. You just consistently play matches every single weekend. So you're being placed into a very stressful situation because you're expected to win. So, and my game was just really starting to flow by that point. And with that, I had the American kind of bravado and confidence. So I didn't really lose. And then I had a lot of coaches through college. Like when I moved to University of Houston, Stina Oswald was the coach there, but then she was having another child, so she retired. And then Jen Hyde, who is the current Florida State University coach, she became our coach. And that was another great coach for me to have with what I needed at that time in my life. And I just remember, I think it was my junior year, I was doing well. I was like ranked 50th in college. And I remember she took me out to Jamba Juice or somewhere, and she was just like, look, you could do a lot better. Like, you need to work more, like do extra. And I always remember that kind of chat. And so from then on, I was doing extra fitness. I was getting my diet better, making sure that I wasn't eating the wrong things, which you can easily do in America. And so I got a lot fitter, and then my game again took off again. I went from 50 up to top 10. And that was probably one of the big changes again, just from that talk that Jen gave me.
I think that's a really interesting thing. You talk about a coach probably understanding something in you that maybe you don't. And if you frame that wrong, that could be a massive detriment. But it seems like you pitched it kind of right, in the right environment, to say, actually, you're not utilizing what you've got like we see it, and you're not utilizing it at the moment.
Yeah, it's really quite a vivid memory, and I was working hard and everything, and she didn't. And yeah, and she said it in a way where I didn't be like, well, I'm doing well, like I'm 50, what do you expect? And I was like, oh, okay. So I got special, I'd like sourced out what players did on the pro tour with fitness, and just made sure that my diet was a lot better. I probably dropped about a stone in I needed to drop a stone. I was like 14 pounds too heavy, and that just really allowed me to do a lot better.
And did she say to you, these are the specific areas and here's what we're going to give you? Or did she tell you, like, these are some of the areas, go and research what you need to do?
No, she literally just said, you could be doing a lot better, work harder, do extra. That was pretty much it. And I was like, okay. And I guess at the time it was, you could but she just said it in a way where, like, I don't work well with coaches. Well, I've never worked with a coach who is kind of verbally abusive and just pushes all the time. So I felt that I'd built up a relationship with her where I trusted her and I would get positive feedback on a regular basis. So when she did push me or did say something which was difficult to say, I was willing to take it in. And I was old enough as well. I was 20 to be like, okay, yeah, you're right. And so I did more. And then you've got everything around you there. You've got all the facilities that you need in terms of like physios. So you've got all the hot baths, cold baths to loosen up your muscles and everything, the massages. You're being looked after all the time with the strength and conditioning coaches. So you kind of got this team around you, which someone like Andy Murray would have on the pro tour. I was getting that at university, which was really helpful without worrying about the cost. I came out with no debt, which nowadays is difficult to do.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that tactic, the way she said it as well, is it makes you look and maybe be honest with yourself. So you mentioned earlier, like, I needed to lose 14 pounds. And probably there's a bit of you going at that time, and I would have been saying, actually, no, if I lost a bit of weight, I might be more mobile. Or actually, you know what, if I recovered better, I would probably perform better in training. But you're like, but I'm doing enough now, it's fine. Whereas when she goes with that open-ended, like, listen, you're top 50 now, which is great, but you're not utilising everything you've got. You could be top 10, figure it out. You've got to have a level of honesty in yourself and go, right, actually, what am I kidding myself on here? And it is nutrition, it is strength conditioning, it is this. And then I need to be the one to fix it. It kind of comes from you rather than her forcing you to do it, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It was certainly a turning point. And that fall, so the August to December time, you have all the big tournaments. I won regionals, which is huge. So the region was the whole of Texas and then Arkansas and I think Louisiana, and it was a very strong region. And the draw for the tournament at the time was 128. So I had to win 6-7 matches. And I ended up winning it. And then that propelled me into the indoor nationals, which was just a huge event. And so I just started kind of picking away at all these different people who were well known, who were at the schools like UCLA, Cal Berkeley, Stanford, the University of Florida's, Houston. Everyone was like, who is this girl from Houston? And I ended up starting to do a lot better. And that just then propelled me on to the next transition, which I have no idea when I started thinking about going pro. Everyone's like, well, when did you want to go pro? And I just moved on to the next pathway, basically.
Well, it's like a natural progression through, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So what does that process actually look like? Because we talk about, obviously in football, it's quite a defined thing. It's kind of a contract and then you turn pro. But what does it actually look like in a process from you guys? You obviously graduate and then what?
You just start playing tournaments. So you can, a lot of people say I'm a pro and I'm on the tour because anyone can be, but realistically, unless you don't make any money till you're top 100. So I was number 2 in Great Britain for singles and 199 in the world at the time, and I was about £10,000 in debt. If I'd been a football player, I would have been on 100 grand a week at that level. So I kind of
it'd be fine.
Yeah, I chose the wrong sport. But yeah, it's kind of just a lot of players do it where there'll be a group. I was lucky, there was a group of us who were kind of graduating at the same time. A lot of the top 10 went a lot more rapidly up the rankings than I did. Bea Bielek, who won nationals, she got into the top 100, I think, within 6 to 12 months. So our paths, we started together, but then they moved on quicker than me. But the big thing for American University is this: it's a nice bridge to the tour. So all of those years I would have done if I'd gone pro at 18 and had to start at the lowest level. I wasn't kind of mature enough emotionally, mentally, physically, I wasn't. But because of college, I'd had 4 years to improve my game. Once I got on the tour, I got into the top 300 within a year. which meant that I didn't get stuck in the lowest possible tournaments where you run out of money. Emotionally, you're just like, what am I doing with my life? Mentally, it's very difficult. So at least I made that big jump quickly, which is what you tend to see. And then once you get into the top 300, especially being British, I started kind of getting wildcards into Wimbledon and being helped a little bit like that, which again, well, everyone dreams of playing Wimbledon. Then all of a sudden at 23, I'm playing Wimbledon with Jane O'Donoghue in the doubles. So it was kind of a nice reward.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a sec, because I want to quiz you on that moment, etc. But in terms of like the brutality of schedule, one thing, kind of doing a bit of research into this and also having a bit of an interest in tennis, it seems like it's kind of a catch-22 where if you're a top player, you can probably get enough ranking points to get into competition, so you can pick and choose what ones you go to, what ones you don't go to, manage your schedules. But it seems like if you're in that kind of grey area where you have to play tournaments to accrue enough ranking points to get in or get wildcards or be in qualification, but by doing that number of tournaments, you're then obviously more fatigued from both playing, psychologically, all that type of stuff. So what would actually a yearly schedule look like for someone at that kind of 100 to 300 range? What would it actually look like schedule-wise? How many tournaments do you play in? How vast and exhausting is it for those guys?
It's brutal. You're just away all the time. I think I went around the globe twice in 1 year, just constantly traveling. One of my doubles partners was Courtney Nagel. She's the University of Oregon head coach, and it's when we decided that we just focused on doubles, and we played like 8 tournaments in a row. I think I traveled through 7 countries in a 24-hour period or something ridiculous, because you don't have much money. So we're going from Slovenia on a 4 a.m. train to get to, I don't even know where we're coming from, like Austria, and then you go into Sweden, then we're flying across to America. Like it's just constant, and you're doing it on a very small budget as well, because all your flights you're buying last minute. And so you're not traveling in style. And when I was first started out, I traveled with Emily Webley Smith, and you'd share rooms with people all the time and share, like, imagine staying in Japan in like their hotel rooms are tiny and a single bed, but the cost of fortune, like you'd have to just all kind of make do. So it's very difficult, like very demanding. You're just literally traveling every week. Like you can't really stop, because you got to build up those points. And I remember being on the WTA tour and sat down with one of the doctors. She was amazing. Like really, she helped when I had my head injury. But they had this program where they'd put in your tournaments and you get a red flag if you like hadn't had a week. So there's just red flags dinging all the time. You just like, I know it doesn't make sense to play 6 in a row, but that's just what you have to do, unfortunately. And some of the places you're in Mexico for 6 weeks, and at the beginning you're staying with families, which is fun, but it can be quite draining emotionally after a while.
So in terms of, there's 2 questions there. In terms of finances, how are you financing it? Is there prize money, or what does that look like? I guess if you got knocked out early on, then there's definitely no prize money. You're kind of going through. And when you are looking at it from a traveling perspective, how much effect does it have on your performance? Because you would have gone from being in a college system where, you know, got everything catered for you, got physio, you got all these things, to now actually you've kind of got a grind of every single week you're having to go somewhere new, probably not as catered. Food-wise, you're probably going, well, whereas before I was getting salmon with whatever, to now it's like, well, what's open at 3 a.m. when we arrive? I've got to eat, I've got to get in tomorrow at 11. How do you manage both of those things?
It was like, it's funny looking back. I had probably 6 years on the ITF tour, and they're my fondest memories. Like that it was really fun because I just got out of college. I'm traveling with my college friends, but we're in Mexico, and in order to get to each event, you had to take a bus. But these bus journeys are 10 hours long. So you're like going on these buses for, I remember going, we were going, me and Emily were going to Costa Rica, which is like, you go over the mountains. You're on this, so you can imagine what, like, it's quite scary going around all these like villages and stuff, then down into the canyon. And like, I remember they were showing like Glitter, you know, the Mariah Carey movie. I just remember that being on. And then we'd forgotten to take the bus ride before had given us food. So we hadn't bothered to buy any, but this one didn't have food. So you've got 10 hours on a bus. Another one was overnight. So you got 10 hours on just a normal bus overnight. And then you get into the next destination. And so it's just really debilitating. It's good fun. Like, looking back at, because you're young and it's really fun, but it's not something you can do for a long time, and that's why we lose a lot of probably good players, because it is so debilitating. And I guess I was lucky because I come from a country where we have a Grand Slam, and at the time they would give out wildcards for those who they felt warranted it, and so that's kind of what helped me stay in the tennis and continue on, just that kind of influx of money each June. But at the time, like, I don't think they exist anymore, but there was like 0% credit cards. I just like do you remember the egg credit card? Like, there was the egg credit card I'd do for 0%. I'd juggle it, and then I'd switch once the 0% ran out. I'd go to another 0% card. So I just literally be juggling credit cards the whole time. Until I got the influx of cash each year from Wimbledon, and that would then give me another 12 months.
I don't know, it's crazy.
I know. And then I was good, but I just, there's no money in tennis unless you're top 100.
So again, this will link into what we said then. You've gone through all of this stuff, and then you get I don't know if it's an email, letter, call, what it is. You got a wild card at Wimbledon. Was that your first exposure at a Grand Slam? Had you had any others, or was that the first one?
No, my first one I met. So Jane O'Donoghue's from Wigan, so I kind of knew her as a junior, but not really. And her coach was Nick Brown at the time, and I guess they'd seen me play there was a $10,000 tournament in Tallahassee, which is where Florida State University is. And Jane was there as well, and I'd actually done all right. So Nick had kind of said to Jane, you should partner with Sarah, and then you can apply for a wild card. And for me, Jane was an LTA player, so this was huge for me because the likelihood of us getting one was quite high. Even though I didn't know how it all worked back then. I was literally just out of college. So yeah, to walk on court, I think I was on court 18 at Wimbledon against Laura Granville and Alexandra Stevenson was amazing. So that was kind of my first real feel of what a Grand Slam was. And then for years, I'd thought the grass court season was different to all the other tournaments, because for a British person, it was like you're worrying about wildcards. You've got all the media attention. There's people asking for tickets, friends you haven't spoken to for years. Suddenly we're like, hi, Sarah. Like, so it was a huge, like 3 to 4 weeks of your life, which was just like everything. But then when I started getting automatic places into the other slams and playing the French Open, US Open, Australia, you realize Wimbledon's just another tournament, and all the other internationals just see it as another part of the calendar. But initially for me, those first 5 years when Wimbledon was the only Grand Slam I was playing, it was literally you'd have the grass court season and then everything else. And so it was nice to finally just be like, okay, it's just another tournament, it's just another event, and going from there.
How did you find out that you'd got offered a place? What's the process of that?
Like, you have to write a letter to the Wimbledon committee requesting a wild card, and then it gets announced by the LTA. So you'll probably notice this summer it'll get announced on social media, on the BBC, who gets wild cards, and then afterwards you thank the Wimbledon committee for granting one. So yeah, you'll start seeing things now. You'll be like, oh, this wild card's being announced in June. So, but it is a hard, because you're getting wild cards. There's all the build-up events, so you can't really. It might make more sense for your tournament schedule to actually go off to Holland and play the WTA there. But when you're kind of waiting on wild cards, you can't. You have to be in the UK. So when I got to 65 in the world, I could dictate my own tournament schedule and not play at Birmingham WTA, maybe go off to Holland. But a lot of the time when you're waiting on wildcards, because you need them, you might not know until like a few days before which event you're playing, which again, it was very difficult.
And in terms of that feeling, what you obviously you found out, you kind of know you're going there, and it's your first time at a Grand Slam, it's Wimbledon, which you would have grown up watching, maybe going to visit and etc. What was that experience like the first time you kind of go through and go, yeah, here's my players pass rather than the spectators pass? What was that journey and feeling actually like?
Oh, it was, I was spent all day there, and I met Jez Green there, who was Andy Murray's fitness trainer for a long time, and now he's Zverev's fitness trainer. And I met him there, but I literally just would spend all day there, like go and train and then go to the gym and that kind of just hang out. And then you realize when you've done it, it's your 7th year, you actually do it professionally. And I would sit at home and relax and just get the car in to when I needed it. But the first few years, you just like, you sat in the players like restaurant with all the famous players and everything, and you're in the training room with them or in the locker room. So yeah, I just spend all day there initially, but then you soon realize that that's quite tiring and no one else was doing that. So but yeah, it was fun.
Did you see any differences? When you were there, obviously you're there for an entire day, did you see anything where you go, that's why they're a top 50 player or a top 10 player? Was there anything you were able to put your finger on, either the way they prepared or the skills that they had? You go, wow, that is like another level.
Yeah, it's just like, I got to 65 and I probably maxed out, because in order to get higher, you just really, the attention to detail is just so incredible. As much as I worked hard, I wasn't very good at stretching and really kind of, I'd stretch, but I didn't do it as Andy Murray would do. Like, my attention to detail, to the very small things, which all add up to be very important, mine wasn't there. And then also mentally, looking back, I wish I'd invested more in getting a psychologist to help me with different things, because I had a big game. Like, if you watch me practice, I can hit any shot apart from a backhand return. I have a big serve, big forehand, I can slice, I can volley. You put that on someone with a very good mentality, then they could probably do a lot more with it than I did. But so I wish I'd invested more in getting psychological help. The mental side of things I didn't really pay too much attention to. But so I feel I maxed out, and I'm happy. I walked away from tennis thankful that I'd achieved everything, and I was happy it was over. Like, that was 10 years of my life, which was fun, and I was ready to stop. But yeah, the elite, like, you see what Andy Murray does, like, it's literally every minute of the day he's dedicated to getting better, and I wasn't. So I got to where I did, but to be like a Nadal or a Serena Williams, like that kind of dedication, that's why they're there, and very few people make it there.
And is it introvert focused or is it external? So say, for example, Nadal's playing like a Roddick back in the day, would he focus on Roddick's strength and go, this is how I'm going to combat this type of player? Or is it a focus on, right, these are my strengths going into a game. This is how I'm going to, this is how I'm going to expose the opponent using my strengths, and building a game plan kind of around what that individual is able to do? What does that look like game plan wise?
Yeah, I think like for me especially, I always like to put my game style on the court and be aware of what they didn't like or how to play them. But I think a lot of the time the elite players will put their game onto the court and just do a few tweaks if needed. Like you see Nadal, how he's added bits to his game. Even after he's won 20 odd Grand Slams, he's adding bits to his game just to get that little bit better. But yeah, the elite, like I think Judy Murray would be she works a lot with Andy with match analysis and watching people his opponents and coming back with a game plan and everything. Like that's not something I ever did. But if I was playing someone for doubles, we knew, like if someone played me, they knew quite quickly and already knew that if they served slow to my backhand return, I would get the yips and probably dump it in the net. And so people literally just roll in their serve to my backhand. And so you'd know that there'd be certain things which would, in a very key moments, would break down. And you kind of were aware of that with most opponents.
I think that's really interesting. Like you said, maybe using it in critical moments, using that thing against him. It doesn't need to be all the time, but it'd go in a big point, you're about to break or something like that, go, this is probably where this ball's going to go, and pressure's on you to make the shot.
And you smile at me and be like, here it comes, and it roll in, I'd be like, oh. So yeah, it's just like, everyone knew their game style and how to kind of combat it once it got close. Because you look at all the elite players, you can be really close with them, but when it came to the key points, they would step up another level, and that would be the difference.
And in terms of a doubles pairing, how do you go around kind of finding the right person for you? Because I can imagine, using a golf analogy, Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson used to be terrible at doubles together because they just used to clash and their personalities didn't work. If you've got a doubles pairing on a tennis court that are both very fiery and all of a sudden are bickering back and forth, that's not going to be good. If you've got people who've got very similar games that can't do particular skills, I imagine that'd be challenging. So how do you go around, I guess, finding an individual that works for you on a social, personal level, because you're going to be spending time with that person, but then also that's got a game that can make you as a pair very well rounded?
Yeah, like first I kind of looked for my friends, and luckily my friends like Courtney Nagel, the Oregon coach, is who I really like. I think we were like 240 in the world, and we played the Felixstowe tournament right after Wimbledon. And by the end of the year, we were kind of creeping into the top 100. Like we'd literally played a tournament every week, but it was fun. Like it was nice traveling with her. We enjoyed working together on the court. I had a big serve, big forehand, so I would set her up at the net, and she was so fast at the net and amazing hands. So we complemented each other very well. Neither of us, the biggest problem was neither of us could return really well. So if it did become close, like when I played with Martina Hingis at World Team Tennis, and she literally just never missed a return, and so that took the pressure off me returning, because I knew that she was never going to miss. But me and Courtney, that wasn't a strength in our game, so we did well, but we both struggled with that. So yeah, you're trying to find someone who complements you. So like Abby Spears and Raquel Cox-Jones worked really well together, because Abby's returns never missed. Raquel was really fast around the net. I think for men's doubles, possibly it's a bit more contractual, where you might not like the person, but it's a job and you're making money. And so it can be a bit less, I'm going to be your friend kind of thing. But for me, I was going to travel with this person and spend long, long hours with them. So I wanted to enjoy it basically.
I imagine that's quite imperative. If you're spending 10-hour coach journeys with someone you don't like, I imagine that must be a nightmare.
Yeah, and the tough thing with doubles, that like I think it's changed a little bit now, but like if you don't have a constant doubles partner, like you'd have to go to an event and find someone, and then what would happen is, as a doubles pair, you would sign in, and before you'd have until noon on the Sunday to sign in as a doubles pair, and they would calculate who got in the top 16 based on their combined rankings. So at 11:45 on a Sunday, let's say me and you are in, but we're number 16 pair, so we'd be like, oh gosh, I hope no one else signs in. And some people would wait until the last 5 minutes to sign in, which would then dump me and you out. So then you'd have to scramble to find someone who has a higher ranking to then sign back in with someone else. So I don't miss that. I remember being at Indian Wells, and me and Raquel were like probably, I don't know, last two in, and there was about 15 minutes to go, and just hoping that no one else would sign in and push us out. But if you think you've spent all the money to get to the tournament and you don't actually know if you're in it, and you have to kind of have anxiety before that 12 o'clock hour ticks by.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, once you get a constant partner, it's great. Yeah. When you know that you're getting into events. But I had a few, when I played with Raquel Cops-Jones, there was a few events where we were borderline, like we'd flown to Dubai. Or there was an event where we went in Australia, we went to Brisbane for the build up to the Aussie Open. And me and Mary-Eve Pelletier, we didn't get into Brisbane, but we had time to fly to Auckland and sign in. So we then flew to New Zealand to sign in there, to play there. So it's pretty mental when you think about it.
So I get this could be going to something that's more anxious, less anxious. But you mentioned it earlier around the Commonwealth Games out in Delhi, I believe.
Yeah, that was fun.
So in terms of that, what was the process of being involved in that, and how was that for you? Because I imagine that must be quite different, because you've gone from traveling potentially with one other person or a small group of people that you know to you've got a whole kind of band of English people and stuff. So how did that come about, and then what was that feeling like for you, kind of representing the nation in the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah, it was actually right near the end of my career. I'd had a really bad head injury in the July, like that July, and Commonwealth Games was in the October, November. And so I'd been out for a long time with, I'd been hit in the back of the head, and so my brain had been bruised. So it was like a concussion, but even worse. I lost, like, my speech was very slurred, my balance had gone. Like, it was a really hard few months of like rehabilitation. And luckily the WTA were amazing. I kind of traveled around with them.
That from a shot? Was that from someone trying to hit you?
Yeah, I was playing the Stanford WTA, and we'd just beaten Lisa Raymond and Renee Stubbs, who were like top 10 doubles players. It was the first match where me and Raquel had kind of actually done really well and had a complete match. And then the next match, we were playing two people, and one of them had a high forehand really close to me at the net and like kind of went at me, and I turned and it hit the base of my skull. So we won the match because my adrenaline just kept pumping. I didn't really feel bad at all. And then Raquel was like, oh, should you go and see the trainer and just get your head checked? I was like, oh, I'm fine. But luckily one of the trainers was like, why, what's happened? So they made me sit there for an hour until my adrenaline kind of ebbed away, and that's when I started feeling horrific. So I had to do, like, when I was in Canada, they got an ice hockey doctor in to do like the concussion tests, and I couldn't close my eyes and balance on my foot and touch my nose with my eyes closed. It was pretty bad. And I got cleared at US Open. And then because I was still number one in doubles for Great Britain, I was chosen for England to play at the Commonwealth Games, which well, it was just amazing. Like, none of us had obviously played for a medal before, so the added stress of knowing that you're in the, like, we played for the bronze, so knowing that you could walk away without anything was like, it was difficult. It was different to anything you'd ever come across in tennis, because we'd never gone through it before. So getting on the podium was amazing. It was a brilliant experience.
To pick up on that first, I'm going to ask another question. What was that like when you're about to step up there and you know that obviously you're going to be getting a medal? What was that feeling like as you're waiting for that?
No, it was amazing. But it was tricky because with tennis, nothing ever stops. And I had a flight at 2 a.m. to get to Linz in Austria for a WTA, and I had to make the flight. And the gold silver game was going on late. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and it was almost going to a third set, I think. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to miss this flight. So it was kind of, once I was up there, it was amazing. But then as soon as I literally jumped off the podium, I was in a taxi and jumping on a plane, fell asleep and woke up in Austria. So it's kind of, it was another one of those memories where it's fleeting and you've got the pictures for it, but you're literally on to the next event because the WTA tournament was on, and you've got to get there for signing.
Looking at, I think it's very prudent at the moment, in terms of that feeling of, you've obviously been knocked out of gold medal contention, but then you've got to go in, almost reset for bronze medal match, and obviously you won a medal, you've come all this way. How do you go around about that as an athlete to prepare yourself to say, right, this isn't a gold or silver, but there's still like a job to do here, and I really want to win? What was that process like? Because you're going from a real low to having to motivate yourself ready for that next one.
Yeah, and then you have it's not like if you lose you're gonna get the silver anyway. You lose and you get nothing. So it was stressful. Luckily I was with Ken Skupski, who was a brilliant doubles player, but the conditions were just it was like probably one of the most bizarre situations I've been in, because it was under floodlights in Delhi, so there was just insects everywhere. Like, we'd be playing and there'd be a cockroach on our shoulder. A little guy would come on at change of ends with a pink feather duster and a dustpan and brush, and would just be banging like grasshoppers and cockroaches and like sweeping them up and running back off. There was just so many, like, if there'd been spiders, I wouldn't have been able to go on the court. There was so many insects just in our bags, like everywhere. So that's what I remember the most about it. But I remember like winning and just hugging Ken and just thinking that was kind of, it was like the cherry on the top of my career. Like, I'd gone through all the fun of the ITF, traveling around my friends with no real kind of thought of playing Grand Slams, just really enjoying the experience, to then going to the WTA tour. It's far more serious once you get there and less friendly, and then finishing off with a bronze medal. And by that point I was kind of like, okay, I'm okay walking away now. I feel like I've kind of done everything I can.
And so looking into that, how was your transition away? Did you have a plan set up for knowing exactly what you wanted to do, or?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a workaholic and also like to have jobs. So that was the one thing that I struggled with the tour, where there's just so much downtime. So from like 2006, I started helping British players with like just understanding what was available to them, the pathways. I approached the LTA and just said, look, can I build a part of the website where there's like directions to like British University, American University? So I remember being in Austria and just not on a computer, just writing stuff down and building a website for them, which they did. And so just as it went along, I started talking to more players, helping them for free, talking to parents. And I realized that I was looking more forwards with like actually doing this part of the work and not training and not competing, but actually being in the hotel room and like working on things. So once 2011 rolled around and I was still kind of struggling with my head, the transition into Tennis Smart and the placement company I do now was pretty seamless, really. And it was the right move, and I was excited to do it at the time. So since then, it's kind of been non-stop with that.
But in terms of what you guys do, it's obviously an invaluable service, if you like, in terms of giving a different pathway. And I think it's always important for people to have different options and they can choose what's best for them. What do you actually provide from a practical setting if there's a young tennis player in the UK? What is it that you guys do?
We basically look after them through every pathway. So the first thing we do, and even like I did a presentation the other night to players as young as 10 years old, just make them aware of what's available. Because a lot of the time when you go into tennis, it costs a fortune, which is quite stressful for parents. It's not a team sport. So like me, a lot of girls, especially at 15, get very anxious about playing. So we just make them aware that, look, you don't have to go pro, but if you play tennis and stay in school, you can go to a British university where they've got incredible tennis setup now, get a good degree. You've got American university. You can stay in the tennis industry if you're passionate about being a coach or being part of something instead of going to university. And then you can go pro. So we basically make it aware of all the different pathways, and then we help people along each one. America being the main driving force, because that's what I'm passionate about, that I'm a product of American University. And then while they're there, we support them. So we have a massive network of I've helped about 1,000 British players. They're all in one network with, these are the companies that I work with now, as I've merged with Keystone Sports. And on that network, they get introduced to people who can then further their careers after graduation. So we have webinars with people in the marketing industry, journalism. If they want to get a master's in a different country, go back to the UK or maybe in Spain, Italy, we can help with that. But there's loads of podcasts and just like different things they can use just to help them with that transition out of university, basically. And so that's what's nice. It's just nice to help players. And if we get a few like me who end up doing really well on the pro tour afterwards, then brilliant. If someone's a CEO of a massive company and they've come through us, excellent. Like that, we're just looking to make sure that they have someone guiding them all the way through.
Perfect. I guess to some extent you can, provide some personal insight into a journey. But then obviously now if you've got 1,000 case studies, you can say, we've had people who've done this, people have done that, and pretty much whatever floats someone's boat, you're able to direct them or provide them with live examples of how it is possible.
Yeah. And what's nice, all of these 1,000 who have come through us before, they can then also, they'll come on and talk. I've got about 30 of them who are college coaches, so they can all come on and do webinars, talk to our players, reach out to them, give guidance. And so it's just a nice big support system around everyone.
Perfect. Sounds like a really good initiative, and I can see why you enjoy doing it, because as you said, helping people, young people, it's a really nice feeling when you can see them go on and progress from a maybe shy 17-year-old such as yourself to all of a sudden being the CEO of a company or flourishing in journalism or whatever that is.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Just watching them, like, to see how Joe Salisbury's done, winning all the Grand Slams, having gone to Memphis, and you got Cameron Norrie, like, to have players go, like, for me, I wasn't a top junior and just had a normal life as a junior. To think that I ended up doing well, having been so anxious about playing, and just because I fell into the right pathway for me and got lucky with the type of coaches that I had who were supportive. There's got to be more people, there's got to be more girls, especially like me, who, if they just have that added confidence when they're a little bit older, then they could get onto the tour and be successful.
Perfect. I've got one last question for you that might be really challenging, so apologies because it's probably not the nicest one to finish on, but who is the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
Well, all of my coaches have been amazing because they all came at different points in my life, which helped. Like Jez Green, who put my body back together after going through college. But then Louis Caillet, who is the best double specialist coach in the world. Like, he's the reason why we have so many top British doubles players, like Jamie Murray, the Skupskis. And I met him when I was kind of deciding, I was like, okay, my body's starting to really fail. There's an opening where there isn't really any double specialist. Claire Curran was like retiring. She was the only double specialist really on the women's side. So I luckily met Louis, and the way he teaches is just, well, it's just incredible. Like he's just, we've got so many good double specialists because of him. So I met him, and that's what propelled me into the top 100, and that's what allowed me to play all the Grand Slams and feel as if my career was relatively successful.
Perfect. Listen, Sarah, I really appreciate your time. I think fascinating insights of what the world of tennis is like, and obviously really interesting story on your part. So really appreciate it, and hope we can catch up with you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.